I didn't need to hear the answers at all. I needed to just be allowed to be without feeling everyone's fear and hesitation about what I was going through. And that would have created
Welcome to the Raw and Real podcast. Are you dreaming of changing your life through opening a business? Or are you curious what obstacles entrepreneurs had to overcome on their journey? Then you're in the right place. My name is Agnes and I'm your host. Hey, thank you so much for listening to this podcast. It would really mean a lot to me if you would join my Facebook group Raw and Real Talks, that I can get to know you better and interact more with you on a personal level. So I hope to see you there. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Raw and Real. Today's guest on the show is Nicole Gibson. She's a social entrepreneur who is seen as an unstoppable messenger of love and human potential, impacting millions of people with her unconventional models of community development and transformation. Currently, she's the founder and CEO of Love Out Loud, a company that aspires to be the world's largest love-based movement. Hey Nicole, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So I heard that in the past, as a teenager, you've been struggling a little bit with mental health. Can you tell us a little bit what you were going through in the past and your journey back then?
Okay, well, I guess starting from the beginning, I had a very unconventional childhood. I went to about 10 different schools between Europe and Australia, and just sort of always felt I guess, an absence of understanding when I looked at humanity and how we lived. It didn't really make much sense to me that we would be judgmental or prejudiced or abrasive, which always, I guess, put me in a frame of mind of being an observer, just observing life and not really feeling like a part of it, but just like a spectator, I guess. And as I got older, I guess I started to find solace in my art form, which was theatre. And I left a mainstream school at 14 to pursue theatre. I trained in a style of theatre called Meisner, which is a really different type of theatre to traditional realism. So Meisner, the premise of Meisner training basically is to be 100% yourself under the given imaginary circumstances. So who would you be as, I guess, these identities that often we walk around in life and we wouldn't want to associate ourselves with, say, a murderer or a thief, for instance, or a liar. But this style of theatre really asks you to go within, to diminish the ego constructs and to step into who you would be in that role. And it gave me a very fascinating lens to connect to the world, because I started to understand that we really are all things. And I fell so deeply in love with this art form. What I was learning, I didn't realize as a 15-year-old, but I was learning quite spiritual concepts. I was learning how to deconstruct the ego. I was learning that we're not the identities we think we are. We're so multifaceted and complex as human beings. So on one hand, I was deeply immersed in this art form. On the other hand, I was in an industry that really was very competitive and high pressure. And I didn't know how to love myself. I didn't understand that, the importance of looking after your mental health and well-being. And I was the type of personality that always devoted myself to my goals and what it is I most wanted to achieve. And I guess the frame that I was growing up within in that art form was, this is the ideal. And I did my best to reach that ideal, but it came at a very massive cost, which was my mental health. I look back now and I realize that I had signs of mental health challenges from really young, 11, 12. I was experiencing anxiety. I used to have really bad anxiety attacks, but I had no idea what I was going through, and I felt a lot of shame around them. So a lot of the time I would remove myself. I would go through this really traumatic experience that was an anxiety attack, but then pretend like, everything was fine. And that went on for many years. But I guess that not really being regulated or known by anyone in my life put me at a real risk for my mental health to destabilize even more in a high pressure environment, which eventually led to an eating disorder. And I guess going through the eating disorder, everything I was experiencing on the inside became so physically visible, which eventually created an intervention. But it was many years that I just struggled inside of myself, not realizing, the degree in which I was internalizing things.
And so, how was it for you when you had these anxiety attacks? What was causing them exactly?
I think everything that I just named, not having a sense of place, not being able to connect.
Hmm.
I sort of see anxiety now as our soul trying to tell us that we're not in balance, like we have this amazing coherent system as a human being, but when we're not aware of how in tune we're really meant to be and what alignment feels like, then there's an incoherence that starts to happen. And like I said, there's an instability that begins to happen between all of our bodies, mental, spiritual, emotional, physical bodies. And for me, that was very much true. I mean, if you had asked me that question 5 years ago, I would have said, I was experiencing anxiety because of the pressure. But the deeper I go into this journey, the more I realize we're really meant to be so finely tuned as a human being, and anything that's not imbalance is going to create a degree of dis-ease in the body, a degree of anxiety. And I wasn't growing up in a family or a societal context that was educating me on nutrition, that was educating me on energy, that was educating me on how I should be feeling and how to trust my intuition and my instincts. So I think it was a range of all of the above. Really, it's hard to say if it was just one thing.
And you mentioned that you also felt disconnected. So, how was it for you where you were with your friends and you had that eating disorder? And I mean, it must have come up in conversations that people started talking about it and how you felt and how that was for you.
Yeah, I guess because of the industry, it was quite normalized. So it didn't start to become, I guess, a noticeable problem until it was at a very critical point. And at that stage, I think what I was going through was so confronting for people that they really did struggle to lean in and have those conversations with me, which was that kind of drove my passion, seeing in hindsight how fragile I was and how vulnerable I was, and seeing the people I love most not be able to lean into that because of their own fears of vulnerability, because of their own fears of having difficult conversations, made me really quite aware of where we were at. I think we've come a long way, but where we were at as a society, like my family and my friends choosing their own comfort, aka not having those conversations with me over what escalated into a very life-threatening circumstance, really showed me how like we're so trapped within our own ego and our own insecurities, so many of us in the Western world, that it's actually preventing us from being in service to the things around us, which is the true meaning of life, is to be um in a state of giving. And I sort of experienced the opposite when I most needed it.
And in general, because you mentioned that a lot of people find it very hard to talk about it and they feel uncomfortable. And often also people just don't know what to say because they, of course, can't completely relate to what this person is going through. And then you don't want to hurt this person even more. So, what do you think is the best approach if we see that someone is going through hardship, through a depression, any kind of struggle, to be there for them and to, talk about this topic in a good way?
Yeah, I think a lot of people struggle to get past themselves, even those questions. I don't know what to say. I don't know if I know the right thing to say. I don't know if I'm the right person. Like, when you really strip that back, it's that person being completely stuck in themselves. They're only thinking about themselves and how they're feeling in that situation. What if I say the wrong thing? What if I do the wrong thing? Where the answer is actually when we can transcend the self and not make it about us. It's not about us knowing the answers. It's about us holding a space for others and truly being with them in their experience without judgment, and allowing that individual to educate us and just listen to them, because 99.9% of the time people know what they need. They're actually not being asked, because on the receiving end of that, the other people in the situation feel a pressure that they're putting on themselves um, to have all the answers. And it's not about that, especially when it comes to something as raw as, the challenges of mental health. It's not about knowing the answers in my experience or fixing someone. It's about normalizing what they're going through and just being with them in that experience.
And what would you have liked to hear, let's say, from a friend in a conversation then, when you were back then in that situation?
Help me understand what you're going through.
Okay. Anything else?
I didn't need to hear. I didn't need to hear the answers at all. I needed to just be allowed to be without feeling everyone's fear and hesitation about what I was going through. And that would have created like relief, a sense of oxygen.
And when was the turning point for you that things started really changing and you started feeling better and you started having a drive to build your own company?
Yeah, I had an experience of unity consciousness. So just complete divine unconditional love. And I'd never experienced something like that before, especially because I was in such a state of darkness. It gave me an insight into the infinite nature of life and the recognition and the realization that even if this physical life that I'm living right now was to end, which was the path I was on, that it doesn't end. I became acutely aware that it just keeps going. And when I was aware of that, I realized, wow, there's no way out of our pain. There's no way out of our suffering other than through it. And it gave me a very new perspective. And being the sort of person I am, I couldn't allow that suffering to be in vain. I had to make it mean something. And for me, that meant getting out of my own way, devoting myself to something a lot bigger than me, and basically handing myself over to. No, I very much believe that the current of this life is unconditionally loving. That is the nature, the fabric of reality. Since that experience, I've been very deeply connected to that, and that's never really ended for me. So I guess my practice has been handing myself over to that and allowing it to breathe me. And through that journey, I've been very guided. The more I devoted myself to service, the more my health improved, the more the opportunities in my stratosphere started to fall into place in this kind of perfect sequence. And that's to me about being in flow with life, not being in conflict to life, not trying to fight against life, but actually allowing it to breathe you. So it was sort of a spiritual awakening, I guess, that put me on a path to be able to heal, that I really contribute all of my success to the understanding that it's not about me, it's so much bigger than me.
And that spiritual awakening you had, was there something specific you did in order to get that?
I think I was at my rock bottom. I was yeah, I felt like I was days away from dying, and things were just getting. I was losing hope. I was in such a state of helplessness, and I had internalized so much suffering by that point that I didn't know how to ask for help. I didn't know how to articulate what I was going through. I just felt so trapped in my own experience, and that, I guess, being in those darkest days, you're confronted with a decision, to give up or to take complete responsibility for what you're going through, and that it can feel like the hardest medicine, to take responsibility for all of your pain and all of the experiences that you feel you're a victim of, and make a powerful declaration and say, no, this isn't going to define me. But I guess that was kind of the crossroads I was at, and it felt very divinely guided that I was here for a purpose, that there was a reason. I guess that was part of why I felt so defeated. I couldn't understand why I had to feel so much pain. And through that experience of being at my rock bottom, I recognized actually within that pain is my most powerful opportunity.
Was it something that you realized by yourself, or was there also maybe a mentor you had that helped you?
That experience, there was no external influence. I had a very amazing school principal who supported me. Um, yeah, when no one else did, when it came to just putting me on track and making sure that I had the right medical support, because my physical health was obviously very compromised. But that experience was not, yeah, it wasn't triggered by any one person. I think it was just me being in so much of my own suffering for so long that it's sort of like the yin and yang symbol, in the middle of the blackness is light. And I suffered so intensely until that point that I realized in the center of our pain is actually love.
And how was it for you when you really started Love Out Loud? What were the hardships that you were going through, and how was it really to, convince people to get on board and get customers?
Customers, it's a weird. I never think of my community as customers, but I suppose they are. Love Out Loud is a startup that I only founded Love Out Loud just under 2 years ago, about a year and a half ago. And I mean, there was a whole journey to get to that point where I wrote Love Out Loud as a philosophy. It started as a book, and then from there grew into a movement. But my early work was all in mental health, so bringing communities together and creating safe spaces where people could speak their truth without judgment, um, and just recognize the healing nature of actually creating spaces where people were just seen and heard and witnessed in their experience with no other agenda. And actually, through that work, I realized we don't need to know the answers. We just need to be willing to be with each other and trust that each person actually has their own inner compass and their own wisdom that will guide them to a place of healing when everyone and everything gets out of the way for that to occur. We're naturally wired to know how to heal. We're so deeply intelligent in our system as a human being. But when we're prodding and poking and telling each other that we need to be this and we need to be that and we need to do it this way, then it actually, from my experience, it gets in the way of us being able to truly connect to what we need for ourselves. So the spaces that I would facilitate very much had that in the middle of the principle of the space. And we saw some like amazing results. Me and the team that I grew through my first organization, which was a mental health charity, a nonprofit, just really profound, people that had seen therapists and tried different psychotherapies for decades would tell us that this was by far the most powerful work they had ever done. But it was so simple. It was just about listening to each other, really. And doing that work for so many years, I just heard so many stories. And even though all of those stories were different, at the center of the story was the same. I just want to be loved. I just want to be accepted. I just want to be seen and heard. And so my biggest curiosity became, if everyone wants this, then why don't we provide that to each other? And that curiosity was something that I just couldn't let go of. I wanted to find the answers, and that became the founding principle of Love Out Loud as the book and the philosophy. And then when the book was published, it really just had a life force of its own. It's like it already had the direction that it wanted to travel. And today Love Out Loud is a social movement with the goal to move from a counter movement to the mainstream, which follows a strategy called the 4% rule, which is the theory of critical mass. When you engage 4% of a population, you hit a tipping point and the rest of the collective consciousness shift. So for us, we look at that globally, which is about 350 million people. And the way we engage is quite multifaceted. We partner with organizations and integrate the Love Out Loud way and philosophy into how they do things. We run many of our own programs. We publish content. There's heaps of different things we do. We run accelerators for entrepreneurs in 13 different areas of social impact. But it's really just been a very organic evolution, I think, because it was founded on such pure principles of love. It has this naturally very magnetic pull to people that want to stand by this message, especially right now in the world. I think it's so needed and relevant.
At the core of each story, it's the same thing that people want. So why can't we give it to each other? So what's your answer to that question?
We've forgotten who we are because we're not in tune. And when you step into a space and nothing's needed from you and no one wants anything from you and no one has an agenda, then you have an opportunity to actually remember who you are. But out in the world, I think for most of us, we're experiencing a million different demands and so much busyness. And what it's created is just a sheer inability to be present with ourselves. And if we can't be present with ourselves, how are we ever meant to awaken? So to be present with ourselves, we need to feel safe. We need to feel safe because what's going to come up in that presence is basically all of the times where you've abandoned yourself, where you've sought outside of yourself to try and fill yourself up, to make yourself feel better, whether that's through technology or alcohol or sex or, work or whatever it is, to fill the void. When you finally come home to yourself, that doesn't go away. You need to reconcile that. You have to feel all of that pain so that you can get to the other side. And when you get to the other side, you reach a place of wholeness and self-fulfillment. And this is when we can truly interact with each other in the way that we deeply desire. We first have to be that for ourselves.
And how do you think we can connect better with the people around us to create a safer space and feel, more connection overall?
Yeah, the first step really is looking at your own self-judgments and your own insecurities and your own self-criticism. And when you become aware of that, I guess the important thing to understand is until you reconcile this, you will be projecting it onto others, whether you realize it or not. So until you're comfortable in yourself, until you've reached a place of wholeness in yourself, it is very difficult to be there in any sort of constructive way for others. But if we can come back to the understanding that we're all in this together and we're all on our own journey, and that, we're not the gods of someone else's life. So that kind of allows you to put your own opinions about how someone should be or how they should be acting aside, and accepting people as they are, not trying to change others, is a really powerful place to start. It means taking a lot of responsibility for yourself, though. A lot of the time we're trying to change everyone else just to make us feel more comfortable. But that's really not the way forward.
Do you know any tips for becoming aware of your own insecurities? Because I think often just, people don't realize that they're there and that these insecurities are influencing interactions with other people in a negative way.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I would say most people are aware of their insecurities, but they're too they feel too much shame to admit them. Um, I would say 98% of the time that's the case. We know what we're insecure about, but it's a very vulnerable thing to own our insecurities. I guess the things that make you feel, the parts of you that you're most afraid to show others, that you're most afraid to reveal about yourself. These are the things that hold us ransom, that becomes a prison because we're walking around life trying to conceal ourselves rather than being open to life. But our insecurities just need our acknowledgement. When we finally have the courage to own our insecurity, then it doesn't have power over us anymore, and we can work through it and past it.
And personally for you, when was the last time you experienced fear, and how do you handle it now when it comes up?
I've been on a fast actually at the moment. I'm 8 days into a fast. So I'm quite deep in this process, and there's a lot of things that come up in a fast, fears and traumas and emotion. And it's been very amazing, actually. The last time I did a fast was this time last year, and the experience was a lot more turbulent than this time. I feel like by day 2, I really was already accessing quite a deep place of observation and peace, which has been amazing. And I guess that's just come from the practice of being a meditator, of my own experience, like being able to meditate in my experience and not attach to things. Like as fear and emotion has come up, it's not that I've been avoiding it. I've just been able to be with it without identifying with it. Because as soon as we identify with that fear, as soon as we identify with those things, and it starts to drive our experience. But we do have an ability as a human being to step back from that and to just watch it, to not buy into it, and to choose something different. So I guess, yeah, more and more that becomes my practice, knowing how to unsubscribe from the emotional experiences I don't want to have and learn how to direct my focus into the experiences I do want to have.
And can you share some of your favorite practical life hacks when it comes to dealing with anxiety when it hits you?
Yeah, I would stop and ask, what is not in balance in my life? And rather than trying to always band-aid the anxiety itself, make real changes in your life that are accumulating to a point where you're feeling anxiety. We got to get to the root of the problem. And that can be really scary because a lot of people don't want to leave the job they hate. A lot of people don't want to leave the abusive relationship. A lot of people don't want to stop drinking 3 days a week, but these are the changes fundamentally. If you really want to heal this anxiety, which is your body's intelligence telling you, hey, something is not aligned here. Something is not in balance. Please listen to me. It's communicating to you. It's not about suppressing that or trying to force it away. It's about listening to it and making the changes that you need to make.
And sometimes I think we're also not completely sure where this anxiety comes from, because there are a lot of factors that influence it. So do you have an idea how we can clarify that?
Yeah, you've got to take time for self-reflection. There's no other way. That most people that I've met along the journey that struggle with these things, they're not spending any time actually with themselves, whether that's training or meditation or yoga or journaling, or just sitting by the ocean somewhere and self-reflecting. Like, be with yourself. If you're not being with yourself, then how can you possibly have these insights? How can you possibly have a relationship with yourself? It's sort of like if you were dating someone but you never spent time with them, how would you ever expect to know anything about them? We need to start to build and cultivate that relationship with ourselves. And when you get to know yourself, then you will start to know, okay, this is what isn't in balance. This is what's not right about my life. And yeah, we can't just expect to know when we're not actually building that relationship with self.
When you're practicing your self-reflection, what kind of questions do you ask yourself then?
For me, when I drop into meditation, my body, like to getting connected to my body is a big part of my process. It didn't start that way. Like I started doing self-reflection and development on a very cognitive level. But then the deeper I got into the work, the more I realized our head is like, 2% of the picture. Like the system of your body, your heart, your gut, like this is where the true intelligence is. And to be truly attuned, that's what we need to connect in with. So for me, when I sit, it's just about looking at what's present. Like I'll ask myself, what's present for me right now? Where are there sensations in my body? What is there a heaviness in my heart? Why is that? Scanning my body, seeing if there's incongruence. I think we're so used to inflammation. We're so used to pain. We're so used to distraction in our body because we're not treating ourselves with compassionately, and that's across the board, from our nutrition to our relationships to how we're choosing to spend our time, everything. That it's almost like we're so used to feeling not good that we have no reference point. But when you finally reach a place where you understand what it feels like to be aligned and to be in your flow, then it's very easy to recognize where you're not aligned. So yeah, I guess committing, whatever that looks like for you, to getting to that place of deep alignment. Maybe you want to set yourself like a 30-day challenge where you meditate every day and train and cleanse your body, and just giving yourself that reference point for this is what feeling good actually is. And when you reach that place, then everything that's not that will become very obvious to you.
And do you still have a last key takeaway, a personal insight that you would like to share that helped you grow?
Learning what love felt like was probably the biggest pivotal aspect of my growth, recognizing that you're only ever choosing love or fear in any moment. And to choose love is to feel expansive and to feel connected, and fear is to feel separate and isolated and alone. And when you realize that we can always make those choices in every moment, for me, it started to, the pathway started to become clearer for me, how I could get out of the fear and get out of the insecurity and get out of the darkness.
And how can people get in touch with you?
There's a few ways. You could go to Love Out Loud's website, which is love-outloud.com. You can look me up on socials, Nick Gibson _ is my Instagram, or Nicole Gibson on Facebook. We also have an awesome community on Facebook, Love Out Louders, of tens of thousands of epic Love Out Louders all around the world. We're always posting really great content and everything in there, so feel free to jump in there too.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. And for everyone who's watching or listening, we would love to hear what your favorite takeaway was from today. So please make sure to comment below the video so we can see what resonated with you.
Hey everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. I publish videos every week that will help you grow on your entrepreneurial journey and that will motivate you to follow through on your dreams. So make sure to hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss any of my new videos.